Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. We are going to start with a quote because this whole live stream is really based on a quote from, and we are going to turn this off. It's driving me nuts. I don't know how I got it turned on. So this live is really based on this quote that I took. It's actually from a little snippet of Brené Brown. So I'm going to read this as my way of starting this live stream. And this one I'm referring to, or I'm calling, this is your wake up call. And so Brené Brown, on one of her YouTube video shorts, says, "We all grew up and experienced varying degrees of trauma, disappointment, hell, and hard stuff. We armored up, and at some point, that armor no longer serves us. The weight of the armor is too heavy. It's not protecting you. It's keeping you from being seen and known by others. This is the developmental milestone of midlife. This is when the universe comes in, puts her hands on your shoulders and pulls you close and whispers in your ear, 'I'm not fucking around. You're halfway to dead.' The armor is keeping you from growing into your gifts, the gifts I've given you. This is not without penalty. Time is up." So this is what you see happen. This is still part of the quote. So this is what you see happen to people in their life. And it's not a crisis. It is a slow, brutal unraveling. This is where everything that we thought protected us keeps us from being the partners, the parents, the professionals, the people we want to be. End quote. So why are we talking about this? I am a leadership coach. I am a leadership consultant. And why are we talking about, this kind of thing for leadership? This is so important. These past traumas, disappointments, hells, hard stuff that we've been through, and the habits that we've created on top of those, or to protect ourselves, to to ensure that we feel safe and protected, those habits, for many of us, they feel like water to the fish. We don't even realize that they're habits. I'll give you an example. For me, one of them that I had developed was talking loud. I had 7 siblings, 2 parents. My father was quite loud. My mother really wasn't. And so in order to be heard, I talked loud. And I don't always even realize how loud I'm talking until I start talking about it. And then I bring my voice down, and then I change my tone. And all of a sudden, my voice is quieter. My voice is what some people might call normal. And so that habit of having an elevated voice, of having an elevated tone, of being louder than I need to be, is a habit. And it took me a long time, and I still fall into that habit. And it actually took, and I'll talk about one of the things I did to try and help me change that in a little bit. But we armor up because of many different things. And Brené talked about it: varying degrees of trauma, disappointment, hell, hard stuff. We're afraid of being vulnerable. We think being vulnerable is being weak. We had, like Brené said, the past traumas where we've experienced trauma, betrayal, emotional despair, and we've developed habits that safeguard us. We've put up a wall. Also, cultural and societal norms. So many of our norms have us not leaning into and allowing our emotions, because when we stuff them down, they come out 10 times harder later. And so we are in a self-protective mode. This armoring up is self-protection. Our primitive brain, our reptilian brain, is the part of us that is there to keep us safe. it avoids pain, seeks pleasure, and wants to do the same thing over and over and over. Doesn't like change, doesn't want you to change. And so that reptilian brain is it thinks it's protecting you. And what Brené talks about is that armor, that protection is no longer serving us. What we thought we needed, and maybe we did, what we needed back when we were a child or a teenager or a young adult, no longer serves us. What is it doing to us? What are some of the things, what are some of the ways that it gets in the way? We are not being our authentic self. We came into this world with our core being. We came into this world with a set of preferences, a set of gifts, a set of talents. And when we develop these habits, we may even develop skills that align with those bad habits, those habits of protection, those habits of fitting in, those habits of trying to do it all, trying to be accepted, trying to be loved. All of those things can turn into habits that is you not being really who you are. And when you're not who you are, there is a lack of trust. People can tell it, people can feel it. And when you don't have trust, you can't lead. Trust is the basis of all leadership. So why is this armor getting in the way? It's reducing your authenticity. It's not allowing you to be vulnerable. For you to be an effective leader, you actually do need to be vulnerable. You need for people to see that you're human, that you make mistakes, that you appreciate and want feedback, that you demonstrate empathy for others. If you are not vulnerable, you can't do those things. Another thing where that armor gets in the way is you may not trust others. You may think that you need to be in control, and so you micromanage, and you really want to have, control and know every single thing your people are doing. I will tell you, I did a talk now a while back, just a short 7 minutes talk with a group about leadership. And when we talked about what are the qualities of bad leadership, micromanagement came up so often. It was like at least 10 times it came up in terms, because I had them all right on Post-its. Another thing of why this armor that we put up gets in the way, these habits that we may not realize we have, is that we are not effective in our communication. Because we have this layer of protection, we are filtering our communication through this, am I safe? Am I okay? Am I in control? And it's going to impede you from authentic communication. It is going to impede you from connection with others. It is going to impede you from really creating a cohesive team and having that communication be authentic and real. And what's going to happen is you are likely going to get defensive. Something's going to come at you and trigger those defense mechanisms. They're going to trigger that need to be safe, that trigger that protection, and you are going to get defensive. And people are going to be like, what? Because it's something that doesn't even necessarily relate to the situation at hand. So reduced authenticity, lack of vulnerability, ineffective communication, micromanagement, and then all of that impacts your team culture. Your team culture is going to be one of fear. It's going to be one of keeping a distance of people, and that impacts people's productivity. They're on teams, they're at the water cooler, they're trying to figure out how to avoid, the next thing that's going to trigger your, outburst or trigger your micromanagement, trigger your control, trigger some sort of defense mechanism in you. And so really, to become a really great leader, there's a few things you need to do. And I'm going to list a few things, and we're not going to go into all of them in detail because I really want to focus on one thing: developing self-awareness, embracing vulnerability and authenticity, building emotional intelligence, seeking feedback and actively working on communication and interpersonal skills, cultivating trust, and embracing change and adapting and evolving circumstances and challenges. So those 6 things, I want to focus on the first one, developing the self-awareness, because that sounds super easy. However, when these habits been so ingrained, we may get that feedback, and even the feedback may be triggering to us because maybe we know that it's something that we've tried to change in the past and we can't. I will tell you, I have been there over and over and over. I've gotten sent, I used to get sent to training and, so why didn't you change? Or they would, I went on a 2-week vacation and they thought things would change. They thought everything would change with a 2-week vacation. The self-awareness piece is so critical. So I'm going to recommend that when you are getting challenging feedback, when you have this, tendency to be the does not play well with others kind of leader, the first thing, the self-awareness is so critical. And putting that space between those things that trigger your reptilian brain, which is doing what it was trained to do. We have to get access to that prefrontal cortex. And so we have to separate what that trigger is that's sending us into that protection mode and our thoughts about it and our feelings. This is a pattern that if you can start to become aware of what are you thinking when someone does something or when something happens in the world, what are you thinking? And so what I want you to do is when you've had a challenging interaction, take a few minutes afterwards and write down, what were the facts? What did the person say? Or what actually happened in the meeting? And then I want you to just brain dump all of the thoughts that you had about those facts. And try to keep in mind that a fact is provable in a court of law. Like everyone would agree on it. Okay. So write down everything that you're thinking about it and how, when you think that way. So for example, maybe you're thinking that person does not know what they're talking about. And when you think that, how do you feel? Maybe you feel annoyed. And when you feel annoyed, what do? We only do or don't do things based on how we feel. And I know this is, there's a lot here. So after a challenging interaction, I want you to pause, take some time alone. What were the facts? What was in the conversation? Who was the person? What specifically did they say? And then what were your thoughts about it? And when you think that thought, how do you feel? And then when you felt annoyed, what did you do? Maybe you rolled your eyes. Maybe you sighed very audibly and heavily. Maybe you shook your head. Maybe you stopped listening. Maybe you already started thinking about your response and didn't even let them finish. Maybe you cut them off. Those are all actions based on the feeling of being annoyed. And that feeling annoyed isn't based on what they said, because somebody else might not be annoyed by what they said. Somebody else might be like, oh, that's interesting. I don't agree, but that's interesting. That's an interesting perspective. I'm not sure why you have that perspective, but interesting. Tell me more. I'm curious why you think that way. Somebody else might actually do that. You may not believe it, but other people may react that way to the exact same circumstances, the exact same facts. So your thought, this person has no idea what they're talking about, triggers you to be annoyed. Your thought creates your feeling of being annoyed. Your being annoyed creates those feelings. And what do you create? You guarantee that you have a challenging interaction. And it's all because of how you're thinking about it. So this is step one. I am not even going to go into any other steps to change anything, because the first step is awareness. So what I want you to do is take those challenging interactions that you're having, give yourself some time to actually look at who was it, what was said, what was I thinking about it, what went through my head, because sometimes we don't even realize what we're thinking. What was I thinking? And because I was thinking that, how did I feel? What feeling did that thought generate? The person and their words don't generate how we feel. What we think about it generates how we feel. Okay? And then what did you do as a result of feeling that way? We don't do things based on what other people do. We do things based on how we feel. So this is just one way for you to begin that process of self-awareness. People always say self-awareness, self-awareness, self-awareness. It's not always that easy. And I'm going to give you one other trick that you can do, because I want you to do this practice on a regular basis. When you have, and maybe you have an awesome interaction with someone and you do the same thing. Wow, that was so great. What was I thinking that made me feel, energized, that caused my actions to be different? So you can do it on either side of it and look and see what are some of the differences in terms of your thoughts versus how you feel and the actions, maybe in the annoyed space. And maybe when you have a great interaction, what are your thoughts, your feelings, and how you acted in that and what you created in the end? If you can, pair up with an accountability buddy, accountability partner. Because as you build this self-awareness, for example, and I'm going to give you I'm going to circle back to what I mentioned earlier with the loudness. I worked with a peer of mine on a project team, or he was one of the IT leaders where I was working at the time. And when we were in meetings, what he would do, and he would do it under he would sit next to me. He would make sure he was sitting next to me. And under the table, so no one else could see, he would do this. And all that meant was lower your voice, lower it down, just bring it down. And part of it is that I just get and you can probably see it in the lives that I do here. I get energized by what I'm talking about. I get passionate, and that passionate often turns into volume. And that volume isn't necessary all the time. So he would just do this. And sometimes I think about that as I'm speaking. I think about him sitting next to me, putting his hand down, and I lower my voice. I lower the volume. And I don't need to whisper. Sometimes I feel like I'm whispering. Like right now, I sort of feel like I'm whispering, and I'm not. It's amazing because my volume has been so loud for so long. But that's a way for you to help with that self-awareness process. And, maybe it's a habit of interrupting, and maybe somebody just does this. Maybe they go like this, which could mean this, but they don't do this. They just put their hand up at their mouth, and you ask them to do that. If you start interrupting and you're not catching it, because it takes time to create that awareness to where you can first be aware after the fact that you did it. That's the first step. The second step is be aware of it while you're doing it. The third step is to catch yourself as you're starting to do it and you still can't stop yourself. And then the last step is to notice when that feeling of wanting to interrupt, for example, comes up, and you're able to not follow through on the urge. You're able to go, okay, I noticed what you're doing there. You're trying to be safe, trying to protect your ego, protect yourself. And I'm just going to listen, so that it takes time to go through those that path of noticing after the fact, noticing during, noticing just before, and noticing as the feeling is coming up, and giving yourself the space of choice. Do I want to interrupt? Do I want to let them go? So that's what I have for you today, based on Brené Brown quote about this is your wake-up call, that, this armor is no longer serving you. And please reach out if this resonates and you could use some support, because I will tell you that I had a coach through most of my career, and I still have a coach, and it has made a world of difference in me being able to shift some of those patterns of the armor that I developed over the years. One of them being loud, one of them being interrupting people. I use those examples because they're things that I've had to work on and practice myself. So Please reach out if you'd like some support. Dottie Posto in plain sight. Would love to talk to you about the 12-week package I have for coaching leaders who are getting challenging feedback. Talk to you soon. See you next week.